Thank you very much. I learned more than I can offer already sitting through the whole morning. So I'm the lead physician of GSK. GSK is one of the largest vaccine companies. We sell hundreds of millions of doses. And just to give you an impression, 1 in 4 children in the world gets one or more of GSK's vaccine, mostly in the developing world, but obviously also in the US. What I want to do in the next few minutes, talk about some of the causes of vaccine hesitancy, then what I believe is the role of industry, and then maybe give a first iteration, and that is also what I want to learn more from you guys, is how we can all turn from vaccine hesitancy into vaccine confidence. So what is causing vaccine hesitancy? Maybe just briefly the definition. It's essentially the reluctance or refusal to get vaccinated in the presence of vaccines. So that is very important. And just to amplify the issue, in 2019, WHO essentially declared vaccine hesitancy as one of the 10 biggest threats for global health. That was just last year. Obviously, defining vaccine hesitancy is easier, but talking about the causes is a different matter. And to build on what Dr. Fu already explained, when you look at the scale of vaccine hesitancy, on the left side you have people who want to be vaccinated, who don't miss a vaccine ever, who vaccinate all their children, but that's a very, very small group. And on the other side you have the anti-vaxxers, who are very loud, who own the internet and are much better than the industry or public health organization, as the previous speaker already highlighted. But the big middle part are people who are indifferent, who go with the flow, who sometimes take vaccine, who sometimes forget vaccine, even though they have nothing against vaccination, and are obviously influenced by their immediate surrounding and by social media and the press. And maybe to amplify the impact of the media, just to use a theoretical example for the time being, just imagine there would be a coronavirus vaccine available in the US today. I think there would be long lines to receive the vaccine, and I don't want to play coronavirus down for the time being, but the risk to catch it, at least today in the US, is zero in my eyes, or very close to zero. However, thousands of people in the flu season, which is still ongoing, have died this winter in the US, just to put things into perspective. Another interesting aspect, and again, Dr. Fu mentioned it with other examples, because vaccination and vaccines are so successful, diseases have essentially disappeared. No student in medical school in the US will ever see hip meningitis, tetanus, polio, and so are people. They simply have forgotten what these diseases are all about, and essentially vaccination has been so successful that real or perceived safety issues are now much more in the forefront of public discussions. So then, another thing is a big difference between medicine and vaccines is the tolerance for risk for the right reason. And let me go through the 3 triangles here. The first is acceptance of adverse reactions. So obviously, if you suffer from a severe disease and there are medications out there with larger side effects, you are much more easy to accept this because of the underlying disease, whereas vaccines are given to hundreds of millions of people, young children, even infants, so the tolerance for side effects is obviously much lower. Then the middle part, the size of the population, entire birth cohorts of children are vaccinated every year, whereas medicines are used for specific diseases and specific populations. And then the last thing is the immediate visibility of the benefits. So if you have a headache and take an ibuprofen or a paracetamol, you have an effect. If you have asthma and take an inhaler, you have an immediate effect. Whereas last year I got the shingles vaccine, I'm at an increased risk because of my age. I haven't suffered from shingles before I got the vaccine. I'm totally fine. I don't even know whether the vaccine has prevented my shingles at this moment in time. So in terms of cause and effect, there's no visible link overall. So what is the role of the vaccine industry? I think two words are important, access and trust, and maybe talk about access first. And the government also has something to do with access, so making vaccines available, make recommendations, making sure that people who do not have access to the health system are not forgotten and get vaccines. But the industry obviously has to play its role as well. And one thing is to give access to information. We sit on all the information on the risks and the benefit of vaccines and have to make this available. But the other thing is actually giving access to vaccines and make sure vaccines are always available, which is not always the case. And just a little bit of education, and I know the slide looks complicated, but essentially two messages. Vaccines are not easy to produce, so you have to build a factory for one vaccine, and building a factory takes usually 5 years. So if you have a sudden increase in demand, that cannot be delivered over time, unlike for medications where this is much easier. But then also the production of vaccine takes anywhere between 6 months for a flu vaccine and 2 years for the more complicated vaccines we, for example, use in the pediatric population. And that means we have to guesstimate today what is the demand in 2 years from now, and most of the time we get it right. However, if, for example, WHO, without any forewarning, decides that they want to make as one of their new goals eradicate cervical cancer, then there is simply no vaccine there. And if other countries introduce suddenly recommendations of a vaccine and the industry doesn't see it coming, it just takes time to adapt. So then the other thing is trust, and it's almost an oxymoron when you talk about the pharmaceutical industry and trust. So when I left CDC and the German Public Health Institute 20 years ago, people were saying I'm switching to the dark side. And obviously there is an inherent bias because the vaccine industry makes money by producing, researching, and selling vaccines. So therefore, my current opinion is that in the discussion on vaccine hesitancy, the industry has to enable other people who are in the front lines, so healthcare workers, nurses, physicians, and pharmacists, and give all the information we have about the benefits and the risk, communicate relentlessly about this to people, to enable the people who are trusted by the public to give this information. So how can hesitancy actually be turned into vaccine confidence? So first of all, I think the term vaccine hesitancy is not ideal because someone who is hesitant has questions and concerns, and if someone has questions and concerns, these questions and concerns have to be addressed. So it would be a huge mistake to lump the big middle part together with the anti-vaxxers. So stay open and give all the information which is needed. The other thing is obviously that we are living in a hyper-connected world, and there's no solution which fits all. So there's no campaign, no major idea, and many people have to pull together here, as other speakers have mentioned in the morning. My last slides, be proud to be a scientist, and several people showed similar slides from similar events. I think one thing is there's actually a piece of good news. We want to convince people on the value of vaccine, and the vast majority of people are not against vaccination. So you want to convince people to join the majority, which is still a big thing, but it's much easier than being in the minority. But I'm here to learn. I know the industry has to do even more to be absolutely transparent on the risk and benefits of the vaccine. Governments have to play their part, journalists have to play their part, social media has to play their part in making sure that fake news is somehow highlighted, as some speakers mentioned in the morning, but also to make sure that advertising money is not flowing to people who actually are out there for misinformation. So that's all I wanted to say. I know we are all hopelessly late, and maybe we can join now the Q&A session. Thank you.